impetus of this talk is not so much to talk about the Pratyabhijnahrydayam that I am using as a basis for some of the discussion, but really to talk about why practice and what practice. And I've kind of mapped out a big territory for that reason, and already, dug myself a deep trench to talk about. But so a couple of, I talked about the documentary I saw about Jupiter last week, and I also had another experience this week where I saw a video about a guy named Brian Cox, who's a British astrophysicist who I've been aware of for a while. And he's very charming, and he looks like he's about, even though he's now must be approaching 60, looks like he's 17. And so his appearance is always a little disconcerting. But he was asked, what is the most mind-blowing thing about the universe? And what he said was its size. They said there are many things, but its size is simply incomprehensible. It is just in the part, and one of the things that impressed me was the way he put it, because the way he put it emphatically stated that the universe is vastly larger than we can see. And this is something that, for the bulk of our lifetime, nobody's ever admitted. Maybe they didn't know. I'm not sure about that. It's possible they didn't know how big it was, that they thought the edge of that there was an edge to the universe, which they now kind of say isn't true. They think it possibly goes on forever. And in that context, I want to say that there is just so much that we don't know. There's so much we don't know. And there is so much that, is possible out there that is simply unimaginable to us. We are aware, and I have mentioned this before, that light exists in an enormous spectrum which only a tiny fraction of is available to us to experience. And further, if we really understood, the current state of quantum physics, we would understand that, what we really think makes up the universe are not lots of particles, but rather lots of what are called fields, or just electromagnetism occupying space, much like the ocean occupies space, or a cloud occupies space. Fields have a resonance to them that is specific, but in this resonance, what we experience is particles. So, for instance, lots of times I've said we're curtains of light. And in fact, that's what we are, curtains of light. Shimmering, resonant fields that overlay one another and become self-organizing in that process of overlaying one another to express you and me. Now, the reason I bring this up is because there are a bunch of people in the yoga world today and an infinite number of people in other spiritual and religious traditions that state what they believe as a fact. There are the biblical literalists, which is a unique phenomenon that emerged in America at just before the Civil War for a purely political purpose, which they're continuing to unfold today. But what I want to say is, if you really are studious and thoughtful, it's almost impossible to believe anything. And I encourage you, to believe only a small amount of what I'm sharing with you. The most important part of that I want you to believe is that practice is essential to the unfoldment of our humanity and the refinement of our highest and finest qualities. Practice is essential to the experience of happiness and satisfaction in our lives. And as far as I can tell, there is nothing other than spiritual practice which will return to you more energy and more benefit than the energy you have invested in it. Only in growing ourselves do we experience a return that is anywhere near worth the effort. So, I know I've said that before too, but it's really true. If you want to grow your life and refine and develop the quality of your experience in your life, you have to change yourself. Because otherwise, each of us is born wrapped in ancestral trauma, and that ancestral trauma is the limiting factor in our capacity to have any kind of different life at all than the life that our ancestors have had. And looking around the room, I am aware that all of our ancestors have had a brutal experience. And that is, for the most part, ongoing. So, okay, that's my intro. Referring to the text, we covered, I don't know, I've just read one or two of these sutras. And I'm working on this text because honestly I think it's brilliant. I think it is, in a sense, derivative because, the real impulse of this text was created a couple of hundred years earlier. And by now, by the time it's written, everything has become kind of synthesized into a concise message, which has its benefits, but also in bringing something, sort of into its simplest form, it eliminates a lot of the sophistication that exists around the edges. But basically, what this text is doing, and what these people are doing at least 1,000 and maybe thousands of years before, contemporary modern science has emerged, is they are saying that consciousness is not localized, a localized function of a biochemical phenomenon. Consciousness is the very essence of the world that we live in. And consciousness is the ground upon which all experience happens, and because of which any shared experience takes place. Right? The reason that we can share experience, the reason we're aware of each other, and the reason why we can communicate is because the very environment that we exist in is permeated by consciousness itself. And that consciousness, is self-aware. So, because consciousness is self-aware, the text identifies this consciousness as Shiva, who is considered to be a being, the supreme being. And this Shiva has many qualities, and some are masculine and some are feminine. The feminine qualities are, for the purpose of our human existence, said to predominate. So we talk about the goddess. But consciousness is everywhere. Consciousness is the basis of everything. What that means is the trees are conscious and the birds are conscious, we know that. The animals are conscious, the trees are conscious, the plants are conscious, the earth, the rocks are conscious, although not highly conscious. Everything is conscious, everything. And so the impulse that has to arise from us out of that recognition is that we are a lot more respectful, respectful of our environment. And we're a lot less, one of the things that happens to me when I go out into nature around here and see the clear cuts on the hillsides, or I look at the river like now when there's been storming, I see the mud on the hillsides free of trees, or the mud in the river that's been washed down. And, it just reminds me of our arrogance, the arrogance of human beings, and their greed, and our lack of fundamental respect for the basic environment that we have. We storm around in this environment, slashing and burning, imagining that, our slash and burn has no, it's an expression of our right and has no, and our benefit, and has no long-term negative consequences, which by now we know extremely well is not true. And yet, the people who actually own the world continue to behave in such a fashion that they imagine they will escape any of the consequences of the actions which they are performing, which they're causing to take place. And this just isn't true. So but it's up to us whether it in any way, no matter what, it's up to us to have a lot more appreciation and respect for all of the environments in which we function, in which we exist. Because, we're not talking about this text, or even talking about changing and enriching our lives in a vacuum. Our lives, are enriched through the process of increasing our understanding and our capacity to observe our interconnectedness in this environment, because we've already said everything is conscious. That means we that are in that consciousness, and that consciousness is in us. It's sort of like, okay, so. And the second sutra says, by her own free will, because now we've shifted into goddess mode, by her own free will, she unfolds the universe upon her own screen. Screen of her own awareness. This uses a metaphor that is kind of a theory that has a whole history of development in Indian traditions called Abhasavada, which uses a metaphor of a mirror. And it says, looking in the mirror, the images that you see are not real. They are just images in a mirror, which is manifesting on a screen, and it is a reflection of light, interacting with the surface of the mirror, which gives the impression. But if you move your hand across the surface of the mirror, you cannot touch, taste, feel anything that you have experienced in the mirror. The images are real and not real at the same time. They are really a reflection of light. So, the universe expresses itself. And, this is sort of an important thing to understand about, especially about Palestinian religion. That is, Palestinian religion posits that there's a God out there that made the earth, somewhere between 13 billion and 5,000 years ago. A God who made dinosaurs, and then decided it was a mistake and erased it and made something else. Not that long ago. The thing is, very simply, that, they have a problem. And the problem is, if you ask these people, okay, God made the world. Who made God? Well, God made himself. God self-created. The problem with that is that if you have a God that made himself, then you don't really need a God. Then made the universe, it's completely possible that the universe made itself. And in fact, the universe, according to the ancients, made itself. It's conscious, self-aware, supreme beingness unfolds the universe in its own consciousness process, its own living respiratory process, and manifests this world however she decides. Now, the important thing about this sutra for me is simply that it's making a profound statement, which is important to make, but it's also saying to each of us, we are not in control. We are not in control. We have little control, if any. We're not in control. Now, as Westerners, we think, our whole culture is conditioned to teach us that pain is a problem. Pain is informing us of a problem. Our discomfort is a problem. And, when a problem arises, there's always a solution. We're taught to, be self-reliant and to solve our own problems. And this is a very slippery slope. And the Pratyabhijnahrydayam is telling us that we don't have control. And in fact, going even further, it's telling us that we don't have a problem. Because the entire universe is the goddess, is divine creative energy manifesting itself for its own purpose. And our problem becomes residing within ourselves in alignment with that purpose. And residing within ourselves in alignment with that purpose, the fundamental nature of the ultimate creative energy, which is unimaginable possibility and absolute abundance, becomes available to us. But while we are not in control and struggle for achievement is it requires a lot of contemplation to fully be able to navigate that slippery slope. The essence of it can be described as contact, alignment, and flow. So, everything is an expression of one thing, which is living awareness. And that living awareness has manifested everything for its own purpose, which, in order to achieve happiness and fulfillment, we have to align ourselves with. The third sutra according to Jaidev Singh, the first person to translate this into English, states that the universe is manifold because of the differentiation of reciprocally adapted objects and subjects. Sanderson goes on to say the totality is manifested there in 8 different modes because there are 8 distinct levels of subjectivity, each of which experiences objectivity in the manner appropriate to its own nature. That's a lot more complicated. Contemporary physics suggests that consciousness permeates all the fields. So Sanderson's translation, that 8 different modes, those 8 different modes, 8 different fields, permeate reality, and each is responding to all the other fields, 8 different kinds of fields. And those fields are responding to all the fields in ways that are appropriate to the nature of each of those fields. And it is this living divergence of fields of awareness, or awareness fields is probably the better way to say it, or another way of saying it is, there are 8 different thoughts. Each thought has a feeling that goes along with it, and each of these feeling thoughts, permeates the whole universe and is the underlying structure of complexity. So, the thought that I have about this is that there is a matrix of awareness manifestation, and reciprocally adapted subjects and objects means first there is 1, and then there is 2, and then there is et cetera, endlessly diverging, reciprocally adapting, differentiated being. Now, here's where I'm going with this, because I'm going someplace that is relevant to us. Each of us is born into an environment which is differentiated by what the Indians would call karmas and what I would call traumas. Each of us we have been born into fields differentiated by, and maybe there's only 8 kinds of trauma. I have not studied trauma very carefully. I have mostly concerned myself with how to get out of it, not what it is. But let's just say we're differentiated by different kinds of trauma that all of us are born into. And so, being born into trauma and recognizing that fact and experiencing the extreme limitations in physical health and vitality, limitations in mental and emotional balance and acuity, experiencing all of the different limits to our range of motion on every level of our being that we do, and acknowledging that, and having the wish, being able to recognize and acknowledge it, and having the wish to go beyond it, first of all, that in itself is a miracle. That we look at our lives and we think, the thought arises, this could be better, I could be better, how might that happen, is not a common thing. It's not common that people question their experience and question their reality and consider how this might be better. You know, we grew up in a culture that is the most educated, wealthiest, most educated culture on the face of the planet. And so fortunately, for a lot of our lives, we were definitely, those people who were my age anyway, were thinking, how can this be better? How can we make this better? How can we make the world a better place to live for other human beings? This was a major impulse in our lives as we grew up. I think that whole thought is completely diminished today, and I don't think people have that thought very much. But we were born in, we must have been born in a wild time. How can we make this better? And this, as I explained to you last week, this notion of making it better was the very foundation of my own, encounter with yoga and my commitment to change myself through spiritual practice. Now, each of us reciprocally adapted. We are completely adapted to each other in the field of trauma that we were hatched in. And thinking about that further, we can think about that one of the reasons why spiritual culture in the traditional world emerged the way it did was that recognizing that we are fully adapted to the trauma of the family systems that we were born to. Ancient great sages like Aryadeva, or who's a Buddhist Mahasiddha, or Machaglabdran, who was influenced by Aryadeva's teaching. She was influenced by a number of people. But Aryadeva says, cut all ties to your family. Cut all ties to everybody instantly, and immediately begin to identify yourself with the absolute highest qualities that exist in you and permeate your environment. They were quite serious about this process of transforming ourselves. In India, both, Buddhists and Hindus and Jains left their family context, went out on their own, and immediately tried to apply themselves to the experience of their own deepest and finest self. A self which we have discovered in our encountering of this text, they considered to be pure consciousness. Pure consciousness which is self-organizing and self-expressing. Within it, all information and all capacity are present. Ta-da! So, this sutra is telling me that it is really important for us to understand that all of our attitudes and opinions and everything we think we know about everything is really a function of our trauma. And, you know, one of the things that this means to me is that it is really important to be discriminating about who we identify with and how we identify with them, and to begin to consider carefully what, you know, level of respect and what level of contact and interaction, you know, is appropriate for us to express in an environment in which there is nothing but living, vital awareness. Does that make any sense to you? I'm more wrestling with this today than I have been wrestling with it previously for some reason. I think I get a little bit jostled by all the
If we're really in a reciprocal relationship, then that makes sense.
We are in a reciprocal relationship with everything. And here's the thing this is saying. We are shaped by the tensions of others in our environment. We are shaped by those tensions. And those tensions exist in layers and layers and layers. We are a function, you know, our expression, our attitudes, our emotions, our expressions of not just they're expressions of the tensions that we have been cooked in. They are expressions of the tensions of the world in which we live in and the family systems we operate through and the business and, you know, all of our activities. All of those tensions make us what we are. In fact, what we actually are is pure consciousness that is full of vibrant capacity and unlimited potential, you know. And this pure awareness becomes limited by the turbulence that is generated in its own respiratory process, which throws up, you know, boundaries between fields, which then separates and magnifies and becomes the tensions that permeates our environment and becomes a structure of our own individual existence. Now further, I want to say that therefore, the company of people who have freed themselves from this whole process of ancestral trauma, the company of people who endure in the experience of contact, alignment, and flow is extremely necessary to the process of liberating ourselves from that ancestral trauma and activating our own deepest capacity for learning and growing and being the richest life that is possible. Because we are shaped by the tensions and traumas of our environments, we have to be very thoughtful about how we allow those tensions and traumas to shape us, to interact with us, and how we interact with them. We have to be careful of our judgments and our attitudes and, you know, understand that everything that happens is a manifestation of the supreme goddess in other words, a different way of putting it is the life that we have day to day is a life that is given to us by the goddess to, challenge us or limit us ultimately. We can accept the limitation or we can accept the challenge to find in every day an alignment that is based in respect and expressed as, loving kindness, flow. And in this process, we become established in I should say, just for the sake of saying it, we become reborn. Because initiation, so let me back up again. Jen and I were talking about the life of sadhus. She had a wonderful trip to India and she met a lot of fine sadhus, and she was just sharing that with me and talking about the life of sadhus. Sadhus are spiritual seekers in India who leave their family context and wander in the world. Those sadhus who are wandering, are wandering in search of a guru. They are wandering in search of a guru. And sadhus wander for lifetimes, if there is such a thing as reincarnation. They wander for lifetimes, enduring the extreme hardships of the life of a sadhu in order to have the opportunity to have the experience of a real guru, of somebody who's transcended their ancestral traumas and lives in a state of contact, alignment, and flow. Contact, alignment, and flow is enlightenment. Contact, alignment, and flow is the enlightened state. Contact, alignment, and flow is that which is beyond the limitations of any boundaries, and which is also beyond the expression of any other will than the highest will. Contact, alignment, and flow. So reciprocally adapted subjects and objects is the source of the endless reinforcement of the tensions of the world, and it is only escaping our initial condition, in spiritual language, or the language of spiritual traditions, in being initiated into the dimension of contact, alignment, and flow that is beyond ancestral trauma, and reborn into a completely new state. These are languages these are words you're gonna hear. They're not words I rely upon a lot, but it's real. Reborn into a new state, not based in ancestral trauma, but based in the knowledge of, our true nature, and a knowledge which we are cultivating and refining and cultivating and refining and cultivating and refining until it is our truest real state of being. Each of us is taking this information and transforming ourselves through the process of spiritual practice into a demonstration of contact, alignment, and flow, which is totally aligned and infused by and infusing the universe, and is an expression of the highest nature of, the goddess the very ground of the universe, the goddess, which is joy and peace. So, reciprocally adapted subjects and objects is how this world comes into existence. Everybody is fucking with everybody else. And they can't help it. This world is just one big ping pong tournament. And everybody's boingy, 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 boingy. And it's only when you learn through practice to put down the paddle and release the impulse to express that tension by hitting the ping pong ball back, or the 15 ping pong balls back, and reside within yourself at peace. Or you become so skilled at ping pong that you can do it without another thought, that we have the opportunity to really reside in our own highest nature. James.
As someone who's transcended their ancestral trauma, and you talked about being thoughtful of engaging intentions because they're shaping your own experience. As a practitioner who is trying to transcend that process, where's the point in which you see attention outside of yourself as something to engage in or to avoid? Or do you understand my question?
Yeah, but if you are in contact, alignment, and flow already, you are rising above any tension. And so everything that you express is a response to what is presenting itself in your day. Mm-hmm. And so, this is why I started out earlier mentioning the conscious world and respect for our total environment, especially the people that we share our lives with. Because if you have, first of all, a fundamental attitude of respect, and then secondly, you are practicing, and I will, in the course of these talks, discuss, I hope, deeply the process of contact, alignment, and flow. If you are practicing this, then any tension that arises in your field of experience is something, first of all, you notice because you feel the contraction in your own energetic mechanism. And secondly, then, that experience of contraction informs you of your circumstance. And thirdly, out of respect, you make contact, align yourself, and flow from within to without. And any tension that comes up outside you are respectfully responding to with love and kindness. Because respecting necessitates love and kindness. Respect necessitates kindness, which in time grows into love. So anytime a tension comes up in your environment, it's very simple to think, how can I be kind in reacting to this? And I know the Dalai Lama says his religion is kindness, and I really appreciate that. And I want you to consider that he's not saying that because he's trying to be a nice guy. And there is nothing altruistic at all about the notion of compassion and kindness. This is not something that we do for somebody else. This is something that we are for our own self. Because if we are constantly boingy boing, bouncing around in the tensions of our own traumas, we are constantly reinforcing the boundaries, the walls, the tensions, the trauma. We're constantly growing trauma, not releasing it. So when we are practicing compassion and loving kindness, we are doing ourselves a favor by releasing all of this, the baggage and the noise of ordinary existence, and rising above it to be present in the highest field that is available to us moment by moment as we move in this world. It's not about it's not about doing something for somebody else. I mean, the Buddhists constantly say, let's help other people, let's help other people, let's help other people, and I'm all for it. I try to help everybody I possibly can. In fact, I'm trying to reel it in a little bit because, but anyway, kindness is not something that we express for somebody else. It has to become who we really are. If we are going to, mature into a state of enlightenment, which is actually contact, alignment, and flow. It's not intellectual enlightenment where we have all the right information. We have that anyway. It is a state of profound enlightenment in which our own soul is released to flow in this world, expressing its own profound abundance and flowing in the profound abundance that is the goddess that essentially manifests this whole show. For whatever reason, we don't know. Because there is so much going on, so much going on, that is completely unavailable to our senses. I would say rather than have faith, which is a Christian notion, we have to have respect for, the fact that there's so much going on that we have no idea about, that our step is to release the tensions and endure in the alignment that is allowed us from within ourselves. And that brings us peace and an access to our deepest source, which is the source of all the information that is present in the universe. We can directly connect to all the information that we require to live a completely fulfilled life if we learn to connect within ourselves and draw into ourselves, or rather evoke from within ourselves, information that is appropriate to our time and space, and allow it to flow. It's all inside us. Eric.
So I hear you saying tensions and trauma a lot, and I want to know how tensions and traumas can be expressed and how to identify them.
There's so many ways tension is expressed. And, so, and when we are dissolving tensions inside us, we are not so triggered by the tensions of others. And when we are taking responsibility for our own tensions and dissolving them, the dire, doom-filled circumstance of the world, doom, doesn't completely sink us. I'm not saying it won't wiggle you from time to time, because it takes real practice to get over flinching when you're about to die. right? But in time, we can learn to not to flinch, but to flow, to breathe and flow. In time, we can train ourselves to breathe and flow. And this is by identifying, first and foremost, with the highest dimension of ourselves. The other day, I had an opportunity to talk to some people who live in the healing, who work in the healing arts. And I was expressing something that I think is really profound about the healing arts, and is something that is a big problem in our world today. And that is, when we are engaged in healing, our world is based on diagnoses, which have been defined by scientists who are categorizing all the different dimensions of illness. And even in the traditional healing systems, diagnosis are necessary to provide an appropriate response. But this whole idea of defining problems, identifying problems and defining them, is very problematic in the healing arts and it's problematic for us as human beings, because as long as we have, say we're trying to heal somebody, and we look at them and we say, this is a really sick person. As long as we have the attitude that anybody is sick, we are a part of their disease. We're a part of their, disease is not the best word. They're a part of their trauma and the pathological expression of that trauma. We are not part of their solution. Being a part of their solution requires us to connect to the fundamental potential, which is profound, which is present in everyone, and to hold the awareness and the contact with that potential through all the different wiggles and jiggles of the unwindment of the trauma or the pathology, and supporting them into the emergence of a state of health. And if I look at someone and I say, oh, that's a sick person, then I'm a part of their sickness. If I look at that person and say, anything about them other than they are a shimmering, glowing manifestation of the radiance and creative potential of the goddess, I am a part of their problem, not a part of their solution. And, I'm not. In the course of our daily lives, we have conversations about this and that, which provoke this and that kind of whatever. We talk about all kinds of stuff. But my fundamental attitude is that everybody is a manifestation of shimmering, radiant abundance manifest in a two-legged form. And that is the thought and the feeling that I work to connect to within myself and hold for everybody with whom I share my life, no matter how much challenge anybody presents to me for holding it. And sometimes people present a lot of challenge. And I don't do this out of kindness to anybody. I don't do it, because I'm trying to be a good guy, or I gave up on being popular long ago. I actually figured out in college that I was never going to be popular. I stumbled into the presidency of a very large student organization. I don't know how it happened that took place. I wasn't running for the office. I didn't try. I just kind of stumbled into it. And as that unfolded, I realized that I was too focused on getting the job done to ever actually be popular. And so when they tried to get me to actually run for office, student body office, I completely declined. Said, I am not a candidate, I am a doer. So, I try to hold, my doing is holding everybody that presents themselves in the field of my life, holding them in the awareness of their ultimate and highest potential, even though sometimes, of course, on a day-to-day basis, we're all frustrated with each other. But, it is easy, once we've practiced a while, to train ourselves to accept and love and be kind and flow with anybody. This is possible. So, and another thing is, Eric, you don't need to actually ever recognize, if you're focused on your own practice and contact, alignment, and flow, you don't need to be concerned about recognizing tension. You will recognize it as you flow increasingly. As kindness becomes increasingly a part of you, you will recognize tension. And, there's a lot of ways in which you'll be compelled to respond. Sometimes you'll ignore it. Sometimes you'll walk away from it. Sometimes you'll negotiate with it, But hopefully in the process of negotiating, you will never be captured by it.
I hear you just saying, Swami.
Yeah. Okay. So, tension. Tension is what creates differentiation in the world. In the ultimate field, respiratory process, the livingness of the goddess generates turbulence, which gives rise to differentiated fields. Tumult gives rise to a variation in frequency of resonance, which separates into fields and builds boundaries. That's what the text is attempting. That is the English way, and my own way of describing what the text is trying to suggest to you. And so further, going beyond turbulence into a dimension of ourselves which is aligned and flowing and therefore abundant, therefore peaceful, in which we are connecting to the place beyond boundaries. Our resonance has become fine to the extent that our awareness permeates all boundaries, just like the goddess, because we are identified with the goddess and aligned with the goddess, we become the goddess, and the resonance of our own awareness permeates all boundaries, and we see God everywhere. And I'll have to talk to you at a later date about the dangers of seeing God in everybody, because it's a very dangerous activity. But for now, theoretically, as we talk about this text, we can say that, differentiate and mutually interacting subjects and objects arise out of turbulence, creating boundaries which, then further differentiate and divide us. Sadhana is about the dissolving, spiritual growth is about dissolving all boundaries and seeing, respecting pure awareness everywhere. So, let's see now. Each individual in whom is a manifestation of contracted consciousness, and their body is the universe in contracted form. So what they're saying here is a sort of a simple statement of something that is the essence of the tantric cosmology, and that is, a human being is the contraction of the entire cosmic process. We are fundamentally cosmic beings. The entire universe has become us, contracted into us, and everything that is in the universe is within us, and anything that is not within us is not at all, does not exist. That's a different way of saying, we are two-legged supercomputers which have access to all the information that exists everywhere and always. Everything that has ever happened or ever will happen is within us. Everything that is within us. Anything that was is within us. Everything that will be is within us. And through the process of self-cultivation, we gain access to that information, and in alignment with the totality of the Goddess, our lives become an expression of that deepest and richest reality. The fifth sutra, which is basically universal consciousness descending from the stage of universal self-awareness, becomes individual self-awareness, inasmuch it is contracted in conformity with the objects of consciousness. Another way, it's just a repetition of what I said earlier, which is that we are shaped by the objects that we relate to. And so we have to be very careful about what are our ambitions and what we, and our repulsions. We have to be thoughtful about that, and we have to be thoughtful about where and why we spend our lives the way we do. Grounded in respect and accepting that the life that you have is the life the Goddess gave you. Life the Goddess gave to you, not to anybody else. You are uniquely responsible for dissolving tensions, releasing your creative energy in alignment with, the highest will, the highest power that you can connect to. So. What time do we have? Okay, good. Any other questions? Okay, good. I want to say that all of Shaivism has two topics. Did I say this already? There are two topics in Shaivism. One is tattva, and tattva's cosmic process, which is sort of what we're talking about now. And the other topic is upaya. And upaya is the activity of self-cultivation, of self-refinement, that allows us to recognize tattva, the cosmic process, and live our lives in harmony with that. So, we're kind of dealing right now with the discussion of tattva. And in India, the notion of tattva is, tattva is brilliant. The idea of tattva is brilliant. And that is that the world is an overlay of many, many, many levels of self-awareness. The resonance of self-awareness interacting with its own self in a living and therefore not completely uniform fashion gives rise to ultimate differentiation. And the principle of tattva is first expressed in a tradition called Sankhya, which, had a big influence on Shaivism by the 2nd century. Sankhya posits 24 tattvas. And we can think of tattvas in the same way that particle physicists today think about, muons and gluons and bosons and heptons, all these tiny, 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 tiny particles that clump together and form, protons and neutrons, and that clump together and form atoms, which clump together and create, as a function of their magnetic fields, give rise to the presence of electrons and photons and yada yada, and you've got the whole world. And then atoms become molecules, and molecules become complex chains of chemicals. In human beings, they become amino acids, which become proteins, which become cells, which differentiate themselves into function, like mitochondria, and so on and so forth. Now, in Shaivism, a further refinement of the tattva system of the Sankhya and their 24 layers of particles becomes 35 layers of particles, plus 1, 36 being the total and the original field. Oh, this total and original field interacting with itself becomes turbulent, and that turbulence has 35 layers of differentiation, which gives rise to everything. So it's pretty cool that thousands of years ago, people with the only tool they had was their own meditation practice, had access to information which we now, have due to the existence and, the development of highly advanced mathematics and astonishingly advanced measuring devices. But all of these measuring devices don't seem to have been necessary to these people because they had contact, they had the right idea, and they develop the right tools to bring their minds into a tranquil state of contact, alignment, and flow from within themselves, and they looked out upon the world as, their own soul, with joy and respect and happiness. Then, the discipline, the self-discipline that yoga is sort of, the term yoga implies, because yoga implies a self-discipline, a restraint. The self-discipline that yoga implies in the beginning, when we have a kind of a dualistic mindset, dissolves, and, the expression of our yogic practice is really not an expression of suppression or constraint in the slightest. It is an expression of the exuberance, subtle exuberance, mind you, lest we trigger somebody. The exuberance that we hold within ourselves as we gaze upon our lives and see the glorious expression of our own soul. Any other questions? Okay, I want to reiterate that. You can ask me, if you can wave at me, I'll stop talking. But I want to reiterate that, while I am trying to share something with you, a perspective, this isn't a belief system. This is a suggestion. And I am really open to, wouldn't it be wonderful if, somebody in my company was so established in all of this, simple but profound and demanding work that I'm sharing with you, that they could, change my perspective, rewrite the whole text. That would just be fantastic. I'd be thrilled for it. There is no immutable, laws of reality. There are no immutable laws of physics. The laws of physics that we have today, and the whole idea of a search for a theory of everything, is just ridiculous. And the reason why it's ridiculous is because our senses, we have evolved. The evolution of our senses is still so limited that we have no idea what the fuck's going on, frankly. We really don't. And it always just, impresses me how arrogant human beings are. I'm reminded when I see clear cuts, on the hillsides and mud in the 20 million years worth of soil being washed out into the ocean every time it rains. Just reminds me of how arrogant and wasteful we are. And, how if we just had some respect for, for nature and each other and the wonderful opportunity we've been given, we could cultivate an experience which would be beautiful for ourselves and so abundant that it would naturally overflow into the lives of every life that our life touched, which is the basic idea here.
Is there any benefit or usefulness to think about do-overs?
To think about do-overs? Nah, I wouldn't.
Refinement process?
What I would think of is that if you see something that you feel is inadequate, or say you're in a situation where you felt like you didn't function as well as you might have. If there was some hurt feelings over it, you can always say, I'm sorry. And, I'd like to start again. That's easy to do. And then on the big stuff, like personally, I would have to say that, my biggest regret in my life is that I failed to close the ashram completely the day Rudy died and run away. Sincerely, I feel like that was a huge mistake for me that I made. It may not have been a mistake for you, but it was a mistake for me because that decision, made the enormous pain and suffering that I have endured in the process of sustaining this phenomenon, it made it inevitable. I feel like that was the critical decision that I made, and that every other decision that I made after that, every other choice, whether it was conscious or just a state that I got pushed into, all of it became inevitable. And I feel like, and that's ever more clear to me now as I'm away from it all, and all of that baggage that I have, been forced to carry around for 50 years is falling off of me. I'm feeling a lot more, the simple sweetness that, the trauma of holding space for a lot of tourists caused me. So I can't have a do-over on the ashram. There's no do-over available. I can only say that to myself, that was the life the goddess gave me. This is the life the goddess gave me. It is the life that the goddess gave me for whatever reason she did. I don't think about it. I could think about it and I could come up with a story, but I don't really care. It doesn't matter anymore. So on the big stuff, there's on the little stuff we can have do-overs. You get to sweep the floor in the exercise room every Monday or Tuesday. And if you missed a spot, you get to come back next Tuesday and do it again. And if it so happens that you missed a spot where there's a thorn that I get in my foot, because you missed a spot, I might complain and you might apologize or not. Doesn't matter, right? The stuff that doesn't really matter, we can do over. The big stuff that does matter, we just have to be, we just have to accept it all as what we have been given to bear, and we have to learn, train to bear it with grace and dignity. A key concept which I will talk about further in these talks is tapasya. Tapasya is the burning, is the sort of suffering that we endure that arises out of our commitment to practice. When we constrain our senses and when we constrain our vital energy, of which our senses are a part, we hold that gently within ourselves. In the process of our spiritual practice, that energy builds up inside us and activates our traumas. It activates the boundaries, the layers, and the boundaries between layers in us. It activates the places where we have been fractured, or the fractures that we have inherited. Mostly everybody is born pure and simple and unfractured, and in the process of being born and life with our parents, we all get fractured. Some people get a lot more fractured than others. But we are wrapped we're fractured and then wrapped in different parcels. Tapasya, sadhana or spirit is a term that is spiritual practice, causes tapasya because as we build up our own creative energy and it becomes stronger, it activates the boundaries. And the activation of those boundaries is in fact a healing process, which while is experienced as pain, ultimately manifests as a dissolution of boundaries and an emergence of wholeness within ourselves that facilitates our capacity for total alignment in ultimate reality and the manifestation of ourself as contact, alignment, and flow. We'll talk more about that as we get into a few more details. Okay, anybody else? Sarah.
You were talking about tension, and at the beginning of my practice, certainly tension, pain, and happiness was the motivator for doing practice. And trying to find the best way to motivate from where I am now, and without it being you should, yada, yada, yada.
Well, that's a really nice question, thank you. And it gives me the opportunity to backtrack a little bit. Remember I talked to you about, like having attitudes or judgments about anybody is sort of part and parcel of having attitudes and judgments about ourselves that denies us, that denies us the deepest alignment with our own being, which is ultimate being. Well, the thing that motivates me now, more than anything, is my wish to grow. And the brilliance of a wish to grow is that the wish to grow is not based on our interaction, our reciprocal engagement with the world, which is constantly shaping and reshaping our limitations. Our wish to grow, comes from, it arises out of the very deepest dimension of our own creative capacity. It is not expressed in contrast to anything, but rather, it is expressed as the highest potential which is available to any human being. And it manifests as peace and profound abundance. So, as long as I am alive, it is, and it is the intention of the goddess and her own nature to grow and to express her own nature. And so it is our wish to grow that is still in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, is everything to us. Now, in the beginning, we're experiencing tension and pain and frustration and disappointment in ourselves and in others and everything, and that's a part of what that's part of the burning and the motivation to grow. As we do grow and we stop judging ourselves and we stop judging others, then pure growth is really what it becomes all about. That, we are, rooted in ultimate creative awareness and expressing the exuberance that is the goddess, as individual and, the individual growth and expression of all the fields that we're comprised of. So, I still to this moment, and which is why I'm here with you, really want to grow.
Swamiji, I wanted to share, for me, I mean, my tensions used to be extreme, and I still have moments of that. But what's interesting for me is that the tensions can become so subtle that it's like, okay, this is the background noise, but if I'm in an experience that frees those tensions enough, I go, oh, there's more. And it helps me to see where I can go with that potentially and try to hold on at least a little memory of that.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Claudia. Beautiful. Because we exist in a field, this body exists in a field of differentiated subjects and objects. Everything, we are a subject, everything else is an object, except that everything else is a subject, and for that, we're an object. And so there is this constant reciprocal interchange happening, which, viewed from a higher perspective, is a respiratory process, a living process that, we can be aware of, but I would just say, which is also very challenging to have judgments about, to diagnose, to say much about, in other words. We can be aware, we can be aware that there's more, we can feel the breath and the dissolution and the awakening and the expansion and the opening and the expression. But, finally, living in simple, joyous peace is the ultimate reality, in the ultimate abundance. Trying to figure it out always gets us in, intellectualizing stuff that there's just no point in intellectualizing. That is an endless, merry-go-round. And this is why devotion, this is why bhakti yoga, this is why devotion is the highest. And earlier when I said, sadhus search for gurus because living in the field of a guru is transcendent to, a field of ancestral trauma and a bridge for us between our state of ancestral trauma and, our ultimate state of contact, alignment, and flow. The sadhus search for gurus, and when they found their guru, well, the Bhagavad Gita encapsulates that experience the simplest, when at the end of it, the last thing that Arjuna says to his guru Krishna is, I will do your bidding. Krishna explains to Arjuna that, everyone who lives in devotion, and this is devotion to life itself, devotion to the goddess, who is Krishna's own innermost nature. Everybody who lives with the awareness in devotion to that instantly becomes liberated, however it is that their life is being expressed. So, it's good to have the basic idea, and that's why I'm talking about this text. And after we have the right idea, it's good to throw the whole thing away and just live in the simple contact, alignment, and flow of your own heart to the heart of life itself, and be peaceful and happy. And don't let any circumstances that arise in the field of your life deprive you of that simple happiness. And do-overs aren't that necessary. Yes, do-over. I started over. I came to an end in Portland. Sadly, that pissed some people off. but it was not anything I had any control over. I came to an end in Portland, and I came here, and so this is a do-over. It's not too bad. It's a do-over. And, I bring with me many lessons from 50 years of experience, running a yoga B&B and being a tour guide, to people who wanted entertainment and,
Just for another perspective, I offered you an apple. You gave me an orchard.
Yeah. Thank you. So, but this is the way. This is the way. We take the apples we take the apple the goddess gives us, which is our life, and we turn it into an orchard. And we feed the world with it. Not out of some sense of responsibility, but out of a sense of gratitude and joy. I also want to say one final thing, and that is that, I talk about gratitude from time to time. I certainly post on my social media posts, I mention gratitude regularly. The Haven that we do on Friday night for me is an expression of gratitude. It is a conscious expression of gratitude. And I want you to know that gratitude is a big word. It's a huge word. And, I'm not ultimately even interested in the word at all. When I speak of gratitude, I am referring to a feeling that we hold in our hearts. But I want to say something about that feeling. And that is, if we are truly grateful, our gratitude will be demonstrated in the respect that we have for our life and for the life that is manifesting around us. Gratitude doesn't need to be talked about really, it needs to be expressed as respect. And as the next thing is, gratitude needs to be, our respect expresses itself in the details that we are aware of and attend to in the work that we do in our days and in the relationships that we hold in our lives. This is really where gratitude meets the road. The rubber of gratitude meets the highway of everyday living. And it's necessary. To grow abundance, we must be grateful, and to grow gratitude, we must have respect. And to have respect, it's hard. Being respectful is hard work. It's hard work. But that whole process, it churns us, it throws us around, it bounces us up and down, but it refines us and polishes us and reveals the sparkly, crystalline, living, abundant, crystals are living rocks. The crystalline nature of your own energetic mechanism is revealed, and you see and are seen as an expression of the ultimate abundance. So I'm really grateful for all of you. I'm grateful for all the efforts that all of you, each of you make every day in to make our shared experience a little richer. I thank you for it. we are blessed and fortunate to be together and to have this astonishing moment in this astonishing place to share with one another. Thank you.